Former President Donald Trump will head back to the White House, marking a big political comeback, what the next 4 years could look like, and the Northeast Florida connection to his victory. Plus, a shift in the balance of power on Capitol Hill. What will that mean for the president-elect's agenda? And Florida's two highest-profile amendments don't get enough yes votes to pass. The role Governor DeSantis may have had in the outcome. Our political roundtable breaks it down on This Week in Jacksonville. Thank you so much for joining us today. 4 years after Election Day became Election Week, the 2024 presidential campaign wrapped up within 24 hours. Former President Donald Trump became president-elect early Wednesday morning as he clinched the 270 electoral votes needed to win. So this is what he told supporters at the Palm Beach Convention Center, who had waited until after 2 a.m. to hear from their candidate.
I will fight for you, for your family, and your future. Every single day I will be fighting for you, and with every breath in my body, I will not rest until we have delivered the strong, safe, and prosperous America that our children deserve and that you deserve. This will truly be the golden age of America. That's what we have to have.
Vice President Harris's supporters were gathered at her alma mater, Howard University, on election night. And after campaign officials told the crowd that she wouldn't speak that night, that she would speak later in the morning, the vice president returned to that stage Wednesday afternoon.
While I concede this election, I do not concede the fight that fueled this campaign. The fight for freedom, for opportunity, for fairness, and the dignity of all people. A fight for the ideals at the heart of our nation.
And joining us now are some familiar faces if you were with us on election night. Government law attorney and author Chris Hand and political contributor John Newman. So the president-elect has already laid out some plans here for a second administration, ranging from mass deportation program, changes to the tax structure, reducing government bureaucracy regulation. How do we expect that these plans actually take shape after January 20th, Chris?
Ken, it increasingly sounds like the first priority for the Trump administration and the new Congress, of which at least the Senate will be Republican. We're still waiting to find out what the status of the U.S. House of Representatives will be the administration's tax agenda. Members of Congress, the current chair of the House Ways and Means Committee, the incoming chair of the Senate Finance Committee, already providing some insights that they are likely to extend the Trump tax cuts of 2017, move forward on some other fiscal matters that he talked about during the campaign. The Congress can accomplish that using what's called the so-called reconciliation process, Kent, where they only need 51 votes in the Senate, don't have to worry about a filibuster. So it sounds like in addition to confirming President Trump's cabinet nominees, whoever they are, maybe the next priority after that will be moving forward on this tax agenda, at least according to the early signals we're seeing from Capitol Hill. Yeah,
John Newman, what do you see? Well, I've been reading some of the, hey, it's a second administration, so Donald Trump will know more about how to run a government more effectively.
That's what I'm hearing, too, in terms of people who have some concerns about the second administration, because there were what they call the guardrails the first time, those institutionalists in the military and on the staff who said, no, the Constitution doesn't let you do this. Now it would appear, particularly from what we see in all the media accounts and private conversations that become public, that he does not want anyone who can actually do that this time. He wants the guardrails gone. So, of course, we're hearing about the elimination of Jack Smith, the prosecutor. We're looking at changes as it relates to all those other legal issues he's dealing with. He can get his attorney general, gets him gone, or some say he can do it himself. And so I think that that's really where the main concern is. What does a next Trump administration look like when there are no guardrails? That's a concern.
Well, there's a next Trump administration coming because of somebody that we personally have met and know. A Northeast Florida connection to the Trump victory took center stage election night. Literally center stage. Longtime political operative Susie Wiles. She was campaign manager. The president-elect called her into the spotlight for a moment there. Susie Wiles worked under Jacksonville mayors John Delaney and John Payton. She also led gubernatorial campaigns for Rick Scott and Ron DeSantis. And John and Chris, both of you know Susie Wiles and what she's done. What did she bring to this campaign, and what impact could she have in this next Trump administration?
I think Susie overwhelmingly brought an atmosphere of professionalism. She is a cool customer. She doesn't get rattled. She's got a very winsome personality. And the fact that she has survived this long with Donald would suggest that her personality is winsome and non-irritating. I've known Susie ever since the Delaney administration. We are friends. When I run into people who work with her, you know, who know me mutually, he said, well, John says hi. I said, well, tell him, you know, give him my highest regards. And we're not going to let politics stop our friendship. As strongly as we disagree politically, that's not going to happen. She's a wonderful person, and I care deeply about her.
Yeah. What do you think about Susie and the impact on the Donald Trump administration? Well, the campaign, first of all, and now moving into a second administration.
Well, Susie obviously deserves, I think, significant credit for this victory. And the way we know that is that when he gave his acceptance speech, Donald Trump actually called her out to share a few words. Susie, who works very effectively in the background, demurred and said, no, other people can speak. But I think that's, to some extent, the secret of Susie's success. She doesn't want to make it about her. She's about the principle. She's got an extremely sharp strategic mind, and I think was also very effective in Trump world in minimizing some of the drama that had previously existed. Everyone has commented that this has been a much more disciplined Trump campaign. The source of that discipline is Susie Wiles, who that's a hallmark of her campaigns, that she runs, moving out drama and keeping the campaign focused. So I think Susie's primed to play a very significant role in the Trump administration. There's been discussion about the idea of her serving as the White House chief of staff. Whether she's in that role, in a role like counselor to the president, it's very obvious that former president, now President-elect Trump, has great regard for her, and she's going to play a central role over the next 4 years.
And let me ask about, John, what you just mentioned about guardrails. Well, it's clear even on election night that Susie Wiles has the ability to say no thank you or no. Is that what you're talking about? That good leaders need someone who can disagree with them and have their opinions respected?
Well, you know, one of the things that I teach at Howard University in the School of Business on Leadership is that in order for a leader to be effective, he or she has to have somebody in their circle who can say when the emperor or empress is wearing no clothes. I'm not so sure anybody can just actually say that to him in a verbose way or an aggressive way, but I believe she has the ability to communicate to him, you may want to take a look at this, you may want to take a look at that, and I think that she's effective in that ability to do that. Outside of her, I don't know who else would bring that to the table, but certainly, as I agree with my colleague Chris, she is in a position to be a great service to him, and in that role can also bring a great service to the nation, whom will need her to do that, since she's going to be close to him.
What would you add to that, Chris?
Well, again, I just think that, you know, she, and there are, of course, others from Florida who have been in the administration. What's been interesting, now that there's some of the speculation about potential cabinet appointees, you're seeing a lot of Florida names.
That's true.
Representative Mike Waltz from, you know, not too far from here. Senator Marco Rubio is another Florida-based name. Of course, you're seeing Susie's name for a White House role. So that'll be something very interesting to track as well, in addition to what role Susie has. What other role do other Floridians have in the administration? Donald Trump lives in Florida. He had his victory party at the Palm Beach Convention Center, as we just saw. Florida has in many ways been the kind of capital, the hub of the Trump operation for the last several years. So beyond Susie, I expect there to be additional Florida influence in the next Trump administration.
Yeah, Brian Hughes is a name that comes to mind. He was chief administrative officer when Mayor Curry left office, and was part of the campaign as well. So the change at the White House, it's not the only partisan power shift in Washington this election. I'll look at the balance of power on Capitol Hill next on This Week in Jacksonville.
You're watching This Week in Jacksonville with Kent Justice.
And welcome back. Still talking with our friends here, government law attorney Chris Hand and political contributor John Newman, as we wrap up our coverage of the 2024 election. Want to shift to the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue here to Capitol Hill. Republicans flipped enough seats to take away the Democrats' narrow margin in the Senate and gain control of that chamber. And going into the election here, Republicans held that narrow majority in the House. We'll see, what happens there ultimately. But John, how does that balance of power shift potentially impact what the president wants to accomplish?
Well, particularly for the Senate, because he has a plurality in the Senate. Of course, the Senate is where they approve those appointees, as well as those who are going to be serving on the Supreme Court. So there is absolutely the possibility of some retirees now that, in fact, I think some even hinted perhaps that if there was a
Supreme Court justices you're talking
Supreme Court justices, that they may retire if there was another president of their choosing. But the reality is that I think that a lot of what the president wants to do, he'll have a rubber stamp in the Senate. Of course, the House, we've got to see what happens. But certainly there's an expectation, if all three branches are in the same party, that there's a lot of expectation that things will have to get done, as they've said, on the campaign trail. That comes into play. If the House remains Democratic hands, it's not as much of expectations because they know there's some blockage there. But if they get all three branches of government, the House, Congress, Senate, and the presidency, if they get that, there's a tremendous expectation that you got to do what you said.
What do you think, Chris?
Well, I think it's going to be fascinating. The Senate is a key. I mean, having it flip, and we're not sure at this point whether that's going to be 52 Republican seats or 53. That's still to be determined. A lot of races have been resolved, but a couple still have not. That's going to be a key issue, not number one for President Trump's cabinet appointees being confirmed. That is something that a new president always wants to happen very quickly so that he has his team in place. I think we can expect that from that Senate. As John alluded to, there are up to 3 Supreme Court justices that I think could potentially retire during the first 2 years of the Trump presidency. That's Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, who's been on the court since 1991, Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito, who's been on the court since 2005, and Chief Justice John Roberts, who has also been on the court since 2005. So there are 3 members of the court that have been on for 20, in one case 30 years at this point. I think we should look for that. The House is a little bit of a different picture because even if Republicans maintain control, it will be a very narrow majority. And we've seen over the course of the last 2 years just how difficult it is for a Speaker of the House to keep all the members of his caucus under control. So that is a situation where Democrats might actually have some more influence because of those close numbers. And of course, in the Senate, even though Democrats will now be in the minority, they will still have the tool of the filibuster. And we'll see what kind of influence that has and whether there are any efforts to change the filibuster now that Republicans have control.
Florida's U.S. Senator Rick Scott reelected, but he's also said there's another campaign. He wants to be elected to be the leader of the Republican Party, that caucus. So he wants to be the Senate Majority Leader. When we were talking election night, you thought that's probably not going to happen. There are a couple other senators that are rumored to have more favor among their colleagues. Why don't you think Rick Scott would necessarily be named to that leadership position? I
think it comes down to personality. I really do. I think that there are those of his colleagues, and maybe that's the evidence as to why the last time he tried to put himself forward, it didn't work. I think that Rick Scott has some personality issues as it relates to how to be relatable to his colleagues. And I think that will be probably one of the primary reasons why he doesn't advance. So I think it really does come down to his ability to coalesce, because at that level, when you're trying to get that position, it's all relational. And so if he doesn't have the ability to be winsome, then he won't get it. And I'm predicting he will have a difficult time doing that.
When it comes to caucus leadership like that, is it a matter of just, hey, other people in my party, I've got to get them on my side for this?
Correct. I mean, it's purely a vote of the Senate Republican caucus. One dynamic to watch is, does President Trump get involved in that contest? Typically, presidents stay out for good reason, and they're well advised to stay out of who the Senate and House caucuses pick for their leaders. But of course, President Trump is someone who obviously follows his own path. I think that is one thing that Senator Scott may be hoping happens, that because he has a long relationship with President Trump, that he weighs in on his behalf. It was interesting. We've already seen the 2 other candidates, John Cornyn from Texas, John Thune from South Dakota. We've already seen Senator Thune from South Dakota advise President Trump that probably not a good idea for you to get involved. You want to stay out of this thing. Because I think there may be some concern on the part of the other 2 candidates that he will weigh in, and weigh in on the part of someone for whom he has a longstanding relationship, Senator Scott. We'll know that relatively soon. That will be decided before the end of 2024, who the new Senate leader will be, because, of course, they take office on January 3rd.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. So stay with us. We're going to come home from Washington. We're going to look at the amendments that took up a lot of space on your ballot in Florida, breaking down the outcome of those high-profile questions next on This Week in Jacksonville.
You're watching This Week in Jacksonville on Channel 4.
Thanks for staying with us today. So Florida voters faced a rather lengthy ballot this year because of 6 proposed constitutional amendments. 2 of them passed, 4 of them failed. The ones that passed were Amendment 2, which puts the right to hunt and fish into the Florida Constitution, and Amendment 5, which increases the value of the homestead exemption with inflation. So failing were Amendment 1, that would have made school board races partisan. Amendment 3, which would have legalized recreational marijuana for adults 21 and up. Amendment 4, dealing with abortion access. And Amendment 6, which would have repealed the public campaign finance matching program. So bringing our guests, Chris Hand and John Newman, back into the conversation here. We all heard a lot about Amendments 3 and 4 for sure in the recent months. Many ads on the airwaves for and against. Both of these amendments, they finished well above 50%, but not at that 60% needed to pass an amendment in Florida. Chris, what do you make of how those amendments performed?
Well, that's a very difficult standard to reach, 60% plus 1. That's a change that was made in the Florida Constitution in 2006. Very hard for amendments to reach that point. And I think when the threshold is that hard, Kent, a variety of factors can influence that. Obviously, there was heavy both support and opposition for Amendments 3 and 4, some interesting coalitions that formed. You know, I think one thing that people will analyze more in the days to come is what was the potential impact of Governor DeSantis and the efforts that he led. Obviously, a very kind of robust effort against those amendments, and controversially, part of that included the use of taxpayer money from various state agencies to oppose the amendments as well. You know, there are many who, allege that that is unlawful because of the Florida statutes. The amount of money, $50 million alone on Amendment 3, the marijuana amendment, even more on Amendment 4. And of course, the Florida Department of Health also sent notices to broadcasters warning them against running advertisements in favor of Amendment 4. That was enjoined by a federal court during the campaign. So I think there'll be more analysis of that role in the defeat of Amendment 3 and Amendment 4 as we move forward.
Yeah, John, what was your take on seeing how those amendments performed, all 6 of them? Yeah.
Well, first I laughed about the amendment about the school boards not being partisan. I think we've already, that ship has sailed.
Because because there's already partisan influence in what happens on school boards. Yeah, we're seeing that.
But I digress, I'm so sorry. I think really in terms of 3 and 4, 3 and 4 had a lot of disinformation involved. In 3, people were told in commercials that people could smoke anywhere. Well, that's not true because there are regulations that can be put in place by local governments. 4, the same thing happened. People were told that there was no parental notification. It's already codified in law. That was a lie. And here's the thing that gets me, though, in terms of the government's the governor's involvement. Republicans traditionally believe in smaller government, less intrusion, and giving the citizenry more voice. How can you say smaller government, less government overreach, less intrusion, and then you have the heavy hand that my colleague just talked about? How can you reconcile? How can you square that circle? And so I think that there will be probably some legal ramifications as to what he did in terms of the money that he used that my colleague Chris.
So Governor DeSantis, his career path, he was an attorney in the Navy and what have you. So he's got a legal background, right? Yeah. He's the top, executive and he was a federal lawmaker as a member of the House of Representatives. Right. Chris, do you think that he missed here? Was there anything illegal or criminal about using state funding in that manner?
Well, there's a state statute right on point about not using taxpayer dollars on, political causes. The Attorney General, who is closely allied with the governor, issued an opinion during the campaign that that in her opinion, those dollars could be spent as they were. But I think this is going to be looked at a lot more, Kent. This has not happened before in Florida history. Governors have certainly express their opinions on amendment, even advocated in their role, their bully pulpit.
Nothing
for or
wrong with
against
that,
it.
right?
Absolutely
Expressing
not.
your
That's
opinion
part
on
of the
it.
First Amendment and free speech. That's perfectly appropriate. I think where people have had concerns is the use of taxpayer dollars, the same taxpayers that either support or oppose Amendment 3 or 4, and those dollars are supposed to be sort of politically ecumenical and not spent, either for or against a particular amendment. I think also the actions of the Department of Health threatening broadcast stations if they ran certain advertising, one that was stopped by a federal court. And of course, talking about lawyers, obviously the general counsel for the state Florida Department of Health very publicly resigned during that process, saying that he was not willing to sort of send those letters to broadcast stations anymore. So it's definitely a significant change from how state government's done it before. And as a result, I think it'll get a lot of additional inspection, examination, and analysis in the days after the election.
And John, just about 30 seconds left. Do you think those two issues, the marijuana amendment, the abortion access amendment, do you think those will come back in these next couple of years for voters to vote on?
I think they will. I mean, both of them, if I remember correctly, were in the 50s, middle 50s, I believe it was, in terms of their voting. So they're only a few points away from getting that high threshold that Chris talked about. I think they both will come back, and I think at some point they both will win.
Okay. John Newman, Chris Hand, thank you so much. Appreciated all that time we spent together on election night as well. And then here we are a few days later talking about what has happened there and the impact on people in Florida and in Georgia, in our nation. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you,
Thank you, Ken.
All right, so Mayor Donna Deegan will join us next time. And a reminder to you, this week in Jacksonville, we are each Sunday morning at this point in the day. I'm Kent Justice. Thanks for watching. You can find us on air on Channel 4, the CW17 as well, and online at news4jax.com or streaming on News4Jax Plus.
See why every day more people are choosing News 4 Jax, Northeast Florida and South Georgia's #1 source for local news.